How's it going, New World? Sethphir here, and today we are back with another video. This time we will be talking about the Lazarus Instrumentality, which is the final dungeon of the game. It's the highest level dungeon that we have currently. So I'm going to talk to you a bit in this video about how to set up for that, the pre-game setup, the party composition you're going to need, as well as the mechanics and little secrets within the dungeon. So we're going to cover all of those things. So first we'll talk about the pre-game setup or the pre-dungeon setup, and if you have seen my previous video about the Garden of Genesis, you will get a more in-depth look of this, basically. So go ahead and check that one out if you're interested in a super detailed look, but we will go through a quick TLDR of what you're going to need here first. So the first thing you're going to want to do is set up your trophies properly, as we have talked about before. So if I go to the workshop and I type in the word ancient, I will see the trophies here, and this one is the Minor Ancient Trophy. When you create this item, you'll get a 3% damage boost to all Ancients, which is all the monster types within the Lazarus Instrumentality, and then you can have 3 of these, and 1 in each of your houses. So you can have 9% damage boost, and if you make a basic trophy, the upgraded version of this, you will get 4%, and the major will give you 5, for a maximum total of a 15% damage boost that is possible. The next thing that you're going to go ahead and want is going to be from the forge. If we walk up here, you're going to get a honing stone for your weapon, and the honing stone is going to give you a flat damage boost to your character. So if we scroll down here, we will see this powerful honing stone. So if you are not a weaponsmith or whatever it is that you, I think it's an armor smith, it looks like, no, weaponsmith, then you will need to get this from the auction house or from another player who has it, but it will give you 7% damage boost for 40 minutes. So as you can see, our damage is stacking up quite nicely here. And then we have one final thing that we're going to go ahead and need to gather before we head into this dungeon, and that is going to be from the Arcana Station. We are going to go down and search under the weapon coatings category, and we're going to find the infused ancient coating, which is going to give us a maximum 15% damage boost to ancients for 40 minutes. So from all of these sources, we have 37% increased damage, and that is going to ramp you up quite a lot in the dungeon. The next thing that we'll talk about, again, a little bit briefly, and I have a full video on this with the garden where we talk about this for a lot more in depth, but we're going to talk about your party composition. In my opinion, having a sword shield player as the tank with the leadership perk is for making for the best damage setup, because these dungeons don't deal very much damage, but the name of the game here is speed, right? Like how many times can you clear it? You can get more clears out, you can do more dungeons. So this is going to give everybody a 10% damage boost and is pretty much vital, as well as sword shield being one of the best tanking weapons in the game. The nice pairing with that for the tank would be the Warhammer, giving you access to the armor breaker ability, which will, with lasting trauma, will lower the target's armor by 20%. And as you can see a pattern here, we want to make monsters weaker so that we could do more damage. Shockwave also has a perk that gives you a 10% lowerment on armor as well, stacking up to 30% from the Warhammer alone. So now you have a few options. You can have a 50% decrease in the enemy's armor maximum, so it can't go beyond that. So you need to come up with 20% more. And there are a few ways to do this. You can do this from a spear user, like a bow spear user. Javelin has a perk that lowers their armor by about 19%, about 20%. And Perforate has an ability that hits 3 times for 5%. And if they're above 50%, it will hit 3 times for 10% armor reduction. So that will hit you at the cap. So whatever way you do it, you can spin it. I know Ice Gauntlet has some damage reduction or defense reduction. I know Hatchet has some, and Void Gauntlet has some with its Void Blade perk as well, lowering it by 15%. So whichever way you do it, make sure the target's armor is lowered by 50%. Okay, that's the important thing here. Then we'll talk about the Void Gauntlet and its importance. You need to have one of these in your group, as you will get access to Oblivion, which will empower everyone by 20% damage, as well as the Essence Rupture, which will put a mark on a target, giving everyone 20% lifesteal. So these are the two critical things that you need for a party. There are also other avenues to explore, like the Baleful Tether, which weakens the target by 20% and can be quite good as well. So it depends on what you want to do with that. I know it pairs well with the Fire Staff, it pairs well with the Life Staff, and you could even use it as an off weapon for some other things. But that would be my recommended setup, would be a Sword Shield tank with a Warhammer, some sort of a melee DPS, a Dex user to use the Spear for armor shred, and then probably have a bow as his main damage weapon, and then a mage with Fire Staff Void Gauntlet. Definitely seems to kick in quite nicely here. You could also alternatively switch to the Ice Gauntlet for this run, as I know these monsters do take decreased fire damage. They will take increased damage from weapons like the Warhammer, so striking, void, and lightning is going to be the elements that the ancients are weak against, so you need to take those type of weapons. So if you have a lightning gem, put it in your weapon. Bring a Warhammer user. Your DPS probably needs to be Warhammer as well, and a Void Gauntlet mage will go a long way, as they will be pumping out all kinds of damage. So make sure to check those out before you walk into the dungeon, as it will make your life so much easier. And as we see mutations into the future, which will increase the difficulty of the dungeons, we will likely be seeing a lot of use of these mechanics, as well as other defensive mechanics like tinctures and warding potions and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm ready to get fully consumed out, but it's good practice for now with the things that we have currently in the game. Alright, so now let's go ahead and dive into the dungeon itself and talk about it. Alright, and here we are in the Lazarus Instrumentality. You will enter the dungeon and walk directly 2 feet ahead, and you will be met with the boss Damysys. He is a shield and spear user. Man, I wish I could have that combination. It definitely would be pretty cool. But he tends to have his guard up a lot, so heavy attacks will break his stamina gauge and allow you to deal damage to him. So make sure you focus on that. Other than that, he's just your typical mini boss. He doesn't have much health, so you should be able to burn him down relatively quickly. The only thing to be aware of would be the archer and ad set behind. As you can see, we did manage to aggro those towards the end, so just be aware that you don't get those in the beginning of the fight, because you can be a little bit dicey if you have all 5 or 6 of those enemies up at the same time for groups that are maybe a little bit less experienced. Once you have cleared these monsters out, you will head up the stairs and move to the first puzzle room. This dungeon likes to make a lot of puzzles, so there's some interesting mechanics going on. As you can see, there are runes on the floor, and when you step on them, there was little rings that were lighting up. Once 3 rings have lit up and a second passes, you will have chosen that rune, so to say. And if it is matched to the rune above the gateway, as you can see up there, we see the B rune, then it will be the correct rune and spawn the right set of enemies. It will then lock in place, and you will move on to the next rune. If you choose the wrong rune, you will spawn enemies and nothing will happen. So basically, you're going to get a little guessing game, like, is that the right one? But as long as you can match the shapes, you should be alright. It's not too difficult. I will say that the best strategy for this is to have your healer press the rune and everybody to stay off of the circles and not to fight around there, as you can accidentally trigger these runes while you're fighting other enemies. Opening up with enemy groups with a shockwave and a path of destiny can be a very good way to get control of a lot of monsters, but do be aware, as the killer part here is going to be these zombies without legs, as they tend to lunge at you, and when a lot of them lunge at you, they can deal a lot of damage very quickly. So do not be caught off guard by this. They are the biggest threat here. The reavers and sort of spear people that kind of run around and hop and do all their crazy stuff are annoying, but you can get control of them eventually. Just make sure that the zombie horde does not take you out and then your team, as that will be the most fatal part of this encounter for sure, by far. So once you have completed the gateway straight ahead, you matched all the symbols, you will then match the symbols on the left with another gateway, and once you have finally done that, you will be ready to move on into the next room. There is a series of monsters to clear, and then you will finally be met with a pylon that will give you a respawn point, and keep in mind there is a chest to the right of that. So let's go ahead and fast forward, and I will show you exactly where that is. And here we are in the hallway that connects to the pylon to get your respawn point. And as you can see, directly to my right is a chest. Sometimes people miss this and they pass it up, and it's very tragic, as since the patch 1.1 Into the Void, the dungeons are now harder, but the expedition chests are fixed, and they will be giving gear score appropriate loot. I have received several 100 or 580 items and above. Most of my items were very nice coming from these chests, and luck will help you get some good stuff out of them, you know, turning some of those greens into purples and on forth. So next, after we have grabbed that chest, we will enter the next room with the first boss, or the second mini boss, Dolos. He is a Reaver boss. He will dash through people and leave a slow on them. Other than that, he just has a flurry of attacks. He's not too difficult to deal with. So make sure you burn him down very quickly, as just with all mini bosses, they're not too much of a challenge. The archer up ahead guards a orb, which is required to proceed to the next area. You will need to channel this orb to open a sort of gate or door that will allow you to fight a few more monsters on your path to getting to the first main boss, Cilla, which we will not be fighting at first. We will need to do a few steps to get there, and I'll talk about those steps. So once you make your way through this little sealed door here, as you can see, someone's channeling the orb, so this should be opening here shortly. There is a set of 3 mobs on the other side of this door, so getting in here early as the tank and getting some aggro established and maybe turning them around the other way can be quite useful. So make sure to check out some of that stuff before you go into the next room. So we'll go ahead and fast forward here and skip to the part where we get towards Cilla, as you will have a few bit of trash to kind of clean up along these hallways before you get there. Alright, and straight up ahead on the path is the next mini boss. His name is Alcyon, and he is quite a doozy. Make sure to deal with his archers in the back, as they can do quite a lot of damage very quickly. The little defender zombies that kind of come creeping around here can also pile up damage on your tank, so be aware of that and try to guard as much of this damage as possible. Let your DPS deal with the archers, and then you could deal with the other ones after. As you can see, I managed to block a big hit there coming out, which is going to be the AoE Nova for the boss, and that's what makes this boss so dangerous. If you block at the right time, you can completely mitigate all of the damage from this boss, but if you do not block, you will definitely take a lot and be forced to probably be downed. If you're a tank, you can probably take a hit, as coming up here in a second I will show you an example of that. But there, as you can see, it did quite 8,000 damage or something close to that, so make sure you don't get hit by that, as most people will be one shot, and that is the hardest part about this boss, is being patient and making sure you guard the hit. So we'll go ahead and fast forward on to the next spot here in a moment and talk about the cleansing ritual. Alright, straight up ahead and into the hall is the cleansing ritual room, and as you can see, I have just triggered something that said cleansed, and this will be this little pillar in the middle. Everyone in your group will need to touch this. If everyone is not touched, you cannot proceed to the next part. So make sure that you trigger the encounter on that little pillar there and get cleansed, as Cilla will not talk to you unless you have done this thing. So once everyone has done that, you will be able to make your way back, and it will spawn a new set of ads as well as a named mini boss. So once you've cleaned up the monsters in this room, you will see a set of 3. This guy used to be spawned in a different area, but since the patch 1.1, he spawns together with a few other ads, which makes him, I guess, a little more threatening, but he's really not too hard. His name is Palace, and he's just a spear user. He likes to run away, so me and my group were always just like, why are you running? It's just chasing this man down to the edge of the earth, but basically you can lock him down with stuns. He really doesn't do anything. He just tries to run away all the time. I don't understand this boss. But nevertheless, he is a mini boss, and he does have a chance to drop really good loot piles, so hopefully you get lucky and hit a nice score on items with him. But once you have killed him, your team will head up the hallway and into the next room, or the previous room, the same room in which you were in, and finally talk to Cilla after you have been cleansed. As you can see on the top right of my screen here, it says return to Cilla, and that means that everyone in the party has been cleansed. They have the hour buff on their bar. Make sure to note the stone on the right here, as you need to walk next to it and touch it in order to get it, because if you wipe at Cilla, you will respawn back at the previous stone, and that's never fun, right? No one wants to do that. So make sure you be careful and take note of that on your way to the boss itself. So now we'll talk about Cilla and her mechanics. So Cilla, once you talk to her, you will trigger the encounter. Once the encounter is triggered, the bridge behind you will disappear, just like with the Garden of Genesis, so make sure everyone is across. And her first phase will start off a little bit light. So she has a few things to worry about here. Over time, Cilla gains buff stacks. As you can see, she starts with 2 on the top there of this little empowerment area, and she will start doing a few melee swings and javelin throws. This buff stack is now ramping up. You can see it's now at 5, now at 6, and eventually it will hit a point in which her damage increase to physical attacks will be so high that you can't deal with it. So the only way to get rid of this buff is going to be this orb that pops up in the back there. As you can see, it is finally up. My teammates should be making their way over towards the orb that has been assigned and pressing it. Once you press it, Cilla will enter an animation and walk over to the orb, and the person who pressed the orb will receive a debuff, increasing the amount of arcane damage they take by 20%, stacking up. You can cleanse this debuff, so if you have a healer with the cleansing touch, or if you have a mage with ice block, you can completely negate this mechanic. Do keep in mind that whenever you force Cilla to go to an orb, she gains a new buff, as you can see on the top there, which will increase the amount of magic damage she is dealing. So this encounter sort of has a hard enraged timer, basically. So once you have triggered so many orbs, she will eventually come to the point where she can one-shot you. So my recommendation would be cleansing the orb stacks right around 9 to 10 of the melee, depending on the tank, how geared they are and how much they can block and how well they know the mechanics. But that's basically going to be the general mindset. And as you could see there, in that phase where she was in the orb, she actually had her staff out instead of her spear. You can see the way her weapon is. It has a staff portion and a spear portion. So whenever she goes to the orb, she tends to bring out her staff version and start shooting arcane attacks. She doesn't really have a general aggro table. As you can see, once again, she's shooting stuff. So this is a great time for the tank to get DPS in, as you can crush her pretty hard. My group is pretty experienced at this, and we all have a lot of good gear. So as you can see, she's dying very quickly. With the proper setup and party composition and utility points, you will be able to do quite a lot of damage, as we will be skipping the next phase entirely. But how the next phase should go is whenever Cilla reaches 50%, but it's more on a timer, so after a certain amount of time has expired and a certain amount of orbs have been pressed, she will now trigger a AoE wipe mechanic, which will basically mean that every time she goes to an orb, she will spawn a set of, like, I guess, puddles beneath every player's location. And this is the important part. You're going to need to stack up on the boss. And when you see the stack for the puddles below you, you will then run after the mechanic has been triggered. She'll, like, kind of coil up in the air and sort of do this AoE wipe mechanic. You will run away from the boss, get out of the puddles, and then come back towards the boss. And this is for the slower DPS groups. The groups that have higher DPS should completely be able to bypass this mechanic entirely. You will never see it. So just be aware of that. That is a thing. And the only other final thing to take note of is she does use this little chain arcane link thing that links 2 players together, and they take a little bit of damage. But if your healing is fine, then you should be able to ignore this mechanic completely. And there is one other final mechanic in that room. She does leave these little orbs behind later on in the encounter, especially when she dashes or after a wipe mechanic, which will root you if you step into them. So just don't step into those. So just be aware that that is some things that can happen in that fight if she is not killed properly in time, right? So now we'll go ahead and talk about this next room. The best split up for this, as you can see these 3 little statues or little buttons here, is going to have 3 people in the middle, 1 tank on the front, and 1 sort of melee DPS in the back, as the front and back sections of this puzzle will spawn enemies in waves, but they will be a small amount of enemies on the front and back and a large amount of enemies in the middle. So we found that this split was best. So all of these gates will be locked. You will not be able to go over and physically help your teammates during this encounter. So that's why the 1-3-1 split is very important here. So usually the bruisers can kind of stun lock these monsters and deal with them really easily with the hammer. And the healer in the middle can also throw heals to the people on either side of the gate. So just be aware of that. As you can see me receiving a little bit of healing there. You can also just chug some potions and be a-okay on your own. But as you can see, there is a timer up up on the top part of the screen, which will basically be the duration for this encounter. So there's two ways to end it. You can either last the full duration, or you can defeat all of the enemies within a side, whichever one happens first. So that will depend on your group, and usually the top or the bottom player can end this encounter before the actual timer goes out. As you can see, I'm getting pretty close to dealing with a lot of these skeletons, and I think I have one final wave before I can end this and open the gate to help the next section of my team. So just be aware that some of the dangers in the middle area of this can be the archers. The archers tend to do a lot of damage, and they will poke down your healer very fast. So you need to get on them and deal with them. There is a few reavers and javelin throwing people, so make sure to watch out for them, as they can be a little bit of a threat, but mainly the archer is the biggest threat. As you can see, we have 30 seconds left, and I have cleared my side. The gate is open, so I am free to help my team now. So I'm going to go ahead and move back in here and deal with these monsters. As you can see, the different variety of enemies coming out here. You definitely have a lot more in the middle section, and we will see a new spawn, and as you can see, there are like the archers and different enemies there. But once you have cleared all of this, so you can basically last until the 2-minute timer is out. As you can see, it's coming up here shortly. All of these monsters should dissipate, and do be aware that you can collect loot from multiple rooms, as you can kind of get different enemies. Oh, I guess they don't dissipate. You just have to clean them up. So anyways, just double check the rooms, because you can get loot bags from a lot of these enemies. So look at the back room, look at the front room, and then you will move straight up ahead to a expedition chest. And once you grab this expedition chest, you'll be on your way to the next room mechanic. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, and here we are in the next room, as you will be greeted with two bosses, Asterus and Tolos. I would recommend stacking them in a corner or just pushing them together wherever the archer is. One is an archer, one is a shield and sword user. They're both kind of annoying, but just get on top of the archer, drag all the mobs there, and beat him down into oblivion. These guys do have a chance to drop loot, so good luck. Both of them can drop a set of gear, and then you will see the next mechanic as you just simply channel the Azos staff to unlock this door here. Once you have unlocked the door, you can proceed ahead to the next area, and you are finally out of the beginning Cilla area. It looks like we went back and forth quite a lot. As you can recognize this place, it's because we were just here for the purifying thing, but now we will finally be going on into the next section. Leading up the hall here, you will see the next pylon. You should be able to touch that on your way. So you will have a series of enemies to sort of deal with. They're not too much, but it will bring you to a room up ahead that will have a sort of wave of gauntlet of enemies before you can proceed to the next door. So let's go ahead and fast forward to that one. Alright, here we are in the next room, and as you can see, we have encountered a named mini-boss named Demos. He comes with the wave of enemies, and once you defeat him, it starts to trigger the spawn of enemies. As you can see, the new set appear here, and it'll do this about 3 to 4 times before the door will finally open. It's very simple. You just kill all the enemies, and then you can proceed on ahead. So once you have done that, you will move up into the next room, and you'll be greeted with another mage-like boss, very similar to the previous one that was super scary. However, this guy does half the damage, so really not too much to worry about there. So let's go ahead and skip over to him. All right, here we are on the next mini-boss, Khamruset. Man, I hope I got that. Arcanist, okay? So he does the same thing as the previous boss, but he just has a lot less health, and he likes to do this weird invulnerability phase. I don't know what that is. The other wizard boss will also do it, so just be aware of that, but he just does really bad damage compared to his counterpart in the other area. So it should be a quick cleanup. You will defeat him. He does give gold, so that is quite nice, and then you will be able to channel this little arcane heart, guardian heart here, which will open the gate. Be sure to grab your expedition chest on the way to the final boss, and then we will start to talk about him, as he does have some interesting mechanics. There's going to be a lot of ways to do this boss depending on your group and how familiar you are with the dungeon, so I'll just explain as many things as possible, and hopefully that will get you guys there. Alright, and now we will be at the final boss, Chardis. As we will move up ahead, we will note a few things in the room. When we teleport across, we will see this glowing spot right in front of me and another glowing spot. These will be 2 orbs that you can deposit, and as you can see, my team is stacked in the corner there. That is a safe spot for ranged players. The place where I am standing is a safe spot for melee players. So these are the good things to be aware of, as if you stand in these spots, you will not get hit by majority of the attacks that the boss does. You will still get hit by some, but none of the threatening ones. So this is a great place to be. So for this encounter, there are a few things. There is going to be a orb to the right and the left of the boss that spawns, and those little glowy portals that we talked about before is where you would defeat this orb's barrier, pick up the orb, and deposit it into the glowy spot. Once you have done so, the orb will be floating above the glowing spot, and it will become available for use on a later mechanic. Once you get Chardis down to certain health thresholds, he will begin to laser a certain player. This player will take the laser until they die, or be healed up constantly, but the laser will not stop and it will keep doing damage. The only way to get rid of the laser is to walk in front of the orb in the glowy spot. As you can see, one of my players just ran behind and deposited an orb. He is now going to the other side to grab the other orb. For high DPS groups, you can actually skip the left side of this orb phase, as you will do quite a lot of damage. We will get the orb just for the demonstration, but we do end up skipping the phase as well, I believe. So as you can see, the player is grabbing the orb, he runs back, and he deposits it in that little glowy spot. Once he has done so, he returns and starts to DPS onto the boss. So the boss will tend to slam his hand down, and with any sort of decent armor on, which you should be having, if you're coming to these dungeons with light armor, it's not going to work well. As you can see, one of our players is getting laser, and he just moves to where the orb was. Once the orb is down, the boss will take like roughly 5 to 7 times more damage from attacks, so make sure you have your full armor defense reduction and start hitting him very hard. All players need to DPS into this phase, and that will be pretty much the cycle. Rinse and repeat this over and over. As you can see, the boss is getting close to 50% health on this first go, and it will trigger his encounter to laser one side of the map. He will disable this side of the map and make it completely unplayable, as if you stand in that purple mist, you will be destroyed very quickly. It will also disable the glowy orb portal for the other side. As you can see, one of our players stepping over here to the right to grab the orb again that was used on the right side to place it back into the mechanic. In a perfect world, you would simply just grab an orb and put 2 on the right side with high DPS, but for the sake of demonstration, we'll just show you what you need to do for that. So with a few of his other things, he has this clapping hand motion. It's very obvious. You can dodge it, you can block it. There is a rolling hand that spins around the battlefield, and a couple of pretty much difficult mechanics to deal with, but I think the general theme here is to have decent armor, and you will just be able to tank through pretty much all of this damage and stand in a healing circle and kind of ignore a majority of the mechanics here. So once you have gotten the boss down to a second threshold, he will start to laser a new person, so this will be kind of relevant to your group's damage, right? So you could get 2 lasers, you could get 1 laser if you were theoretically even faster, or you could get like 3 to 4 lasers, just depending on how many times you know how much damage your group is dealing. If you're not dealing a lot of damage, you could see both platforms up for quite a while. You could see many laser phases where he gets downed. Either way, this is the time to do a lot of DPS. As you can see, he's getting close to the 25% mark, and once he's on the 25% mark, he will laser the right side of the platform. Once he has lasered the right side and the left side, you have now entered the final phase of the boss. You now have a certain amount of time to DPS him down with no lowered state where he gets taking increased damage. It's just regular damage here, and then he will start to laser players one by one. Once he targets you, he will laser you until you are downed, and once you are downed, he will switch to a new target. You can be picked back up again, but as soon as he kills his new target or downs his new target, he will immediately start lasering you once again, and once you have been downed once, that is your life for the encounter, and you do not get another one after that. So if you are lasered again, you will be perma-killed. If you are perma-killed, make sure to hang tight, because if you release, there is a chance that you can sometimes not get loot if you're too far away from an encounter. So we generally just have our players, if they get killed, they just sit there and we finish it up, and then they get credit for the loot. Once you hear the cha-ching and the ding sound, that means you definitely got it and you're good to go. So with any luck, your DPS will be really good on this part, and it can can be a DPS check, and I'm very interested to see what this boss will be like in the future for mutated dungeon modes, because I could see this one being very difficult, especially if there's a high DPS check and a lot of these attacks are hitting you for really big damage, like critical damage, or maybe even one-shotting you. It could definitely be quite annoying. But here you can see the laser is coming in. It is shooting one of our ranged players in the back, but they are just simply healing through it as the boss is almost dead. So it's just sort of a DPS race to get this guy down. Do keep in mind that there is a lot of good loot that comes from this boss. There are several best in slot hammers, bows, you name it. Staffs, fire staff, like everything in the game comes from this guy, man. There's so many goodies. So hopefully you guys get some nice stuff from there. Unfortunately, I got a blue this time, and that was pretty much it. But once you have kind of got that, you can check through and see what kind of stuff you got. As you can see, a lot of my gear score from this dungeon is 580 plus. I received several purple items and special drops, some in the 590s, 598s, so you definitely get some nice stuff. The armor is a bit lacking at the moment just due to the 1.1 patch, but hopefully some changes will adjust that into the future. But I definitely did get quite a lot of weapons for sure. On your way out, there is a teleport which will lead you to a final expedition chest, so make sure to grab that on your way out of the dungeon. But that will pretty much be it for the Lazarus Instrumentality. I hope this dungeon guide sort of helps you and lets you understand some of the mechanics that are going on and gives you a good look at the dungeon as a whole and how to prepare for it to perform better. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell button down below. We also have a join button if you wish to become a member, and a Discord in the description link if you just wish to ask us some questions or just hang out. Either one is good. All right, thanks for your time, everyone, and I appreciate you watching the videos as always, and we will catch you in the next one.